My name is Kevin Davies, and I am the CRO at Provision. If you don't already know Provision, Provision is a software platform that allows you to manage and streamline audited documentation. So it's a configurable hub for you to do record keeping, for you to task manage that, for you to have reporting that surrounds it. And Provision is used across GFSI programs, for social and sustainability programs, for traceability and the likes. So very configurable hub. And this approach to audited documentation, I got to start on years before I joined Provision. Prior to Provision, I ran an operation that processed all the food waste for companies like Starbucks and Whole Foods. We were juggling organic certifications, B Corp certifications. We were operating nationwide, and we had a patchwork of environmental regulations that we had to adhere to, and we had customer audits on top of that. So all in all, we had about 3,000 operating records every month that we were juggling. And I tried to digitize these in a purpose-built platform, but I failed to get one that was intuitive enough for my teams to understand. So we were stuck on binders, and I lost a lot of hair in the process. So I remember one day after we wrapped one of our audits, and we had an armful of binders. We were heading into the room that we stashed all of our binders in. And we were trying to jam these binders onto the racks where we had years of data. And we completely ran out of space. So we started building more of these IKEA racks and tried to jam more of these racks into the room. And we couldn't even fit more racks in the room. So we had to actually move the desk out of the room that we stored all of our stuff in just so we could fit more racks of binders on the shelves. And it was then that it hit me. I was like, what are we even doing here? This data isn't helping us run the operation. It isn't making the business smarter. It's just fueling a culture of checklists. So why are we even doing this? And this was 10 years ago, but it's the position that a lot of companies are still in today. When you take a look at a risk assessment like this, this might be the underpinning of a lot of the programs that you guys manage. And when you think of something like, what is the impact on an operation, that's inherently subjective. But when you're actually asking how likely is a risk to occur, that's really hard for a human to answer accurately. And it's really hard to answer in a way that's actually going to be true a week from now, a month from now. This kind of a risk is dynamic. It's always changing. And when you say that something is, rare, unlikely, what does that mean? Is that 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000? It's the kind of guesswork that might actually cause you to run your program differently and could have, potentially huge consequences. So we think that fundamentally, this kind of subjective, infrequent, static approach to risk is actually undermining the potential of a lot of programs that should be more dynamically managed. And whether or not you agree with that approach to risk assessments, I think that that is just one symptom of a much bigger issue. Really what we believe is that your operating data isn't necessarily impacting your decisions as extensively as it could be. When you think of putting together those risk assessments, are you actually doing that based on a global feed of all of the data from all your facilities, or are you just plucking news articles or going off your own opinions? Really, it's just one indicator that a lot of the food safety records that are done today don't really have a life beyond the audit. We find that this reliance on audits is actually, it can give you a false sense of security. Even with unannounced audits, you tend to know when the auditor is coming. And so, really audits are going to reflect your operation on the best day, not on a typical day. And audits are inherently infrequent. They're, perhaps quarterly, annual, whatever it may be. And so you're not actually getting a real-time indicator of how your operation should run. And oftentimes, what this reliance on audits leads to is a culture of checklists, not a culture of continuous improvement, not a culture of actual risk management. And the audits will never go away. They should never go away. Having a fresh set of eyes walk your facility has inherent value. But having an auditor spot check, 1% of the documents that you ran over the last year, that's just not going to move the needle for your operation. It's the documentation part of an audit that needs to change and better complement the human insight that you want, that should actually bring value to you day to day. So when you think about how could you better complement your human auditors, how can you have a real-time data feed that gives you insight on a day-to-day drumbeat? That's really the opportunity for risk scoring to come into play. So I want to check in with the audience here. There's a quick Slido. If you guys scan the QR code or you go to the link here and enter the code, you can join in the poll here. I'm curious to hear from the room, how do you guys think your audits or your periodic assessments are actually fueling, your management of risk in your business? Okay, we've got a grand majority here. 84, 85% of people think that there's an opportunity to go a little bit further. And I'm curious to hear from the room, this is the last poll before we move on for now. How do you guys use your food safety data today? When you think about it, you have thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of records flowing out of your facilities. What percentage of those do you actually open, aggregate, use after the point of your audit? Okay, this is interesting. So most of the room here is using their data for periodic reports. And this is good. This is a good starting point. There's probably a monthly feed, a quarterly feed that's going up to a board level. This is probably the starting point where you can start to draw insight. There's a portion of the room here that is stuck in the point I was before where it's audit driven. But it's really a minority of the group here that's using their data for daily improvements. And that bottom category that we see at the bottom of the screen here, this is where we all want to go towards. So how do you do that? The thing to differentiate here is that while GFSI programs have forced a lot of documentation to come off the floor, we don't see this as a negative. All of those records that are being done on the floor, they're, for most operations, a massive untapped goldmine. If you're going to bother tracking every product, every program, every procedure, every person in your facilities, use that data. We did a study with our clients and we found that there's so much more data in food safety than people think. If you compare your food safety systems to your ERP, for a typical client of ours, there's 11 times more operating data in the food safety systems than in the ERP. No one would ever guess this. People think that the ERP is really the drumbeat of the business where you can actually track, where your products are, what your volumes are, what's happening. But really, this exists in your food safety program. And so food safety has been confined as a department and, siloed focus when really it's the operating drumbeat for the entire organization to go off of. So with all of this data, the question is, how can you use it better? Because as food safety professionals, the way that we use data oftentimes isolates the people that we most want to involve. If you go to the floor and you start talking about fractional changes in plate counts, if you go to your board and you start explaining, E. coli species, you're going to lose people. You really need to pare food safety data analysis down to a point that actually encourages buy-in instead of isolating others because of the use of scientific language. So the nuance to really nail is using data, but using data in a way that is intuitive and creates a common language from the floor to the boardroom. Everyone speaking the same language, using the same feed. What would that actually look like? Because that's what's needed to get a food safety culture of buy-in. And this is where we want to introduce provision risk scoring. It comes out in a couple months. With provision risk scoring, you get a live feed that tracks your likelihood of non-conformance. So it's in real time. The data that is being logged in your facilities is being aggregated so that you have no gap between things happening in the facilities and insight being bubbled up from managers. It's inductive, so it goes from specific findings on the floor of the facilities to broader, thematic, forward-looking assessments. So it's as close as you can get to being predictive without us actually calling it that. And the important thing here is that we've boiled down the risk scoring so that it is very intuitive, very simple, and actionable. These are visual charts. There are single numbers. There's color coding. It's the kind of thing that you can bring to the floor, they can have a live feed of, and people will actually change how they behave that shift as a result of this. And we didn't design this in a vacuum. At Provision, we recruited some of the brightest minds in the industry who helped us shape what it would look like to have a data feed that complements your audits. So some of the faces that you see on the screen you'll recognize. People like Jennifer Williams, Sharon Beals, Jennifer McIntyre. The brands that you see on the screen are places where they were the head of food safety. So we were able to take some of the expertise from household names in the industry across all points in the supply chain, and they were able to tell us what it would look like to have the perfect complement to their auditors. So how does it come together? What is the risk score? This is an approach that's applicable even beyond Provision. It's based on two key things: activities and outcomes. So leading indicators, lagging indicators of how your operation is performing. So with our activity feed, the way that this works is in Provision, all of your record keeping that's done on the front lines, it's task managed. So you're able to see in real time if that activity was done on time, if it was done late, if it was missed entirely. All of that can be factored by its criticality and by its prevalence. And the same thing is true for how the lagging indicator comes into play. In Provision record keeping, no matter if this is in a metal detector check, an ATP swab, a foreign material inspection, everything can have smart rules. So in Provision, smart rules read data in real time as it's entered. It is able to flag anything that's out of spec, non-conforming. It could prompt the operator to correct it on the spot or escalate it for something that was more critical. When the escalation happens, there's a deviation that is opened and tracked. It can go through one or many stages of resolution, and this enables you to have live status tracking. How critical are your deviations? Are they ongoing? Have these been closed off? And this kind of a lagging indicator is the perfect complement to your leading indicator. Your leading indicator, your task compliance, it's gonna really indicate to you how bought in is your team. When you see operations that are skipping sanitations, that are pencil whipping records, there's a lot of late pre-ops, it can indicate to you that there's a cultural problem. People don't have the time, people don't have the buy-in to actually execute their program as it's been designed. But then the lagging indicator tells you how serious is the outcome of that. Are we having major findings, minor findings? Are these pathogenic findings? Do we have a supplier issue? So this is the way that the feed comes together in order to produce a risk score for you. And again, all measured in real time, all automated and gauged by criticality and prevalence. So what does this do for your operation? The first thing is it helps people understand their performance. If you think of playing a really addictive game, let's say Mario, if you were to press the jump button a second late, but instead of having the real-time feedback of running into a Goomba, Nintendo just mailed you an outcome 6 months later, you wouldn't care by the time you got that. You probably wouldn't even remember it happening. And this is the silent issue that's holding back a lot of food safety programs today. When your operators do something that they know is non-conforming, what happens? For a lot of operations, nothing happens. They could go months before an auditor shows up. The auditor might not even find it. If the auditor does find an issue, does it get buried in an audit report? Like, who actually sees that? It's really hard for people on the front lines to understand the impact that they have on your food safety program. And this really holds back the way that the entire system runs. We fundamentally believe that if people understand what their actions accomplish, they will change the way that they act. And so one of the most important things you can do for your operation is help the people on the front lines understand their performance. And you will find that they are self-motivated to fix those things in real time. And the timeliness of this is so important because on the front lines, the operations in the room here today, you probably have 30%, 40%, 50% turnover in your staff. By the time the audit is actually done, the same people whose actions are on the table might not even be there. So you need a real-time feed that is built for today's short-term workforce. And you need to help them close the gap in the understanding and empower them to take accountability for improving that. So the important thing of how this comes together is that it's not just another audit score. We've seen a problem in the industry with GFSI programs being scored out of 100% because all of us want an A+. And as soon as you start scoring things out of 100, you see that it actually changes the behavior of people in a negative way, not a positive way. This is Goodhart's law. As soon as you start having a measurement that optimizes for perfection, people will hide things. And you actually want to have inspections that are bubbling up findings continuously in your program. You don't want people optimizing for 100%. So Provision's risk scoring uses the gas gauge. It's like a credit score. No one is going to be hooked on scoring a 335 versus a 415. But the important thing is that when you go from 335 to 415, you have a noticeable directional change. You still need measurement in food safety programs in order to understand if you're better or worse, but you need measurement that encourages positive behaviors, not negative outcomes. So this is a really important nuance in how to avoid just another audit trap and actually encourage a real-time feed that has productive outcomes in your operation. So once you understand performance, the next thing is how do you understand change? If you can see that your operation is scoring better or worse, if you've turned from a red to a yellow on the sanitation group for production line B, what do you do next? This is really what's going to turn the manager's focus into continuous improvement. And then the challenge needs to be tracking effectiveness. So if risk scoring is kind of the secret sauce to help managers launch improvements faster, how do you know if those are working or not? So if you've done a retraining and it's actually led to a lower trend in minor findings for one of your crews, that's great. But what if your major trend line is still the same? So the way that Provision risk scoring works, you're able to trend everything over time. You're able to trend everything based on criticality so that you can get a live feed that really informs continuous improvement from the floor to the board. And what enables all of this to actually work is understanding the sources. Provision risk scoring is built to enable drill down. So you can configure teams, you can configure programs, standards, you can configure site structures. And what all of this enables you to do is drill down based on your own sources of risk. So if you wanted to go into a specific facility or all the facilities in a certain region or all of the regions under a certain brand, and you wanted to compare all of them based on supplier incidents or sanitation incidents, hygiene incidents, this is the way for you guys to drill down on that and enable you to actually understand what's moving the needle on your risk. And a lot of us have a hunch of what this looks like already, but this is going to give you a more objective and a more defensible feed, and that can really help you to get a better executive buy-in and rally the investment that you need to actually launch some of these continuous improvements. Because if you go to your board as you're planning your budgets next month, and you say, I think we could improve on sanitation, it is totally different than saying, hey, we have a trend line where we've had 15% degradation in our risk quarter over quarter. We need an improvement launched in Denver. This is the actual feed. So this is what's going to change the ability for you to get the executive buy-in. And this is going to be the real-time feed that actually helps your crews to understand the outcomes of their actions. At a fundamental level, this is going to tell you as a manager, where should you spend your week? It's going to tell your board, where should we invest next quarter? But it's going to also tell your operators, what do we mention at shift change? If the line has just turned from yellow to red, people are going to call that out. People will act differently. So this kind of drill down is what's going to enable continuous improvement. So where are people actually applying this? What we're finding is that you don't have to boil the ocean all at once. We've seen people roll out risk scores specific to just sanitation and then bubble it up into all food safety or point it just at quality, complaints, whatever it may be. Ultimately, the way that Provision is built to work, it's a configurable record-keeping hub. So it doesn't matter if you are managing a regulatory standard, a certification standard, a customer-specific standard. All of these programs at their root are measured or are built to measure risk. And all of them fundamentally have data that's captured in records in the same fundamental structure. And by centralizing more and more of that information together, you can actually achieve a lighthouse in your food safety program that is scouting all of the risk across different facets of your operation, breaking down these barriers that we've seen between health and safety and food safety, production and food safety. Ultimately, all of these things can come together in one feed. So I'm curious to check in with the group again. Do you guys think that this would change how you would actually manage your operations? Okay. It's a universal yes so far, 31 responses. So the question is, if this could be impactful for you, how do you launch it? There's a few key things to call out here that get in the way of risk scoring. The first is a lack of systems. Despite all the digitization that's happened over the last decade, what we find is that there are still a lot of places where paper is hiding, where spreadsheets are hiding, where critical procedures are kind of in SharePoint and open to be broken. What we know to be true is that in order to have this kind of data-driven insight, you really can't leave data out. You need to ensure that your facilities have common systems and that they're purpose-built systems that are fundamentally working in a way that can unlock this kind of data feed. So the easy call to action is where you have spreadsheets, where you have paper, these are vulnerabilities. These are areas where you could have blind spots in the operation, and start by eliminating those. The next thing that we see is lack of structure. So when you pull together digital records, how much do you just have free text floating inside of those? Using AI and LLMs today, you could feed as much free text as you want into those, and they could analyze it. But each time you do that, it might analyze it in a different way. And that can create problems. If you are trying to measure continuous improvement, but your measurement is different each time you do it, you might not get an accurate read of what's going on in your program. So you need a systematic approach to the way that your records come together. You need to reference things in a common way. So Provision is built to address this. There's a library where you can manage your products, your suppliers, your equipment, your locations. All the things that you're going to commonly reference in the program are controlled formats. For your operators, the value of doing this is they can just tap on things. They don't have to type. They're going to move faster. But as managers, what this means for you is that you have a common structure. Even if every one of your facilities does a procedure a different way, if it's the same record type, if it's referencing the same types of things inside of that, this is a structure that can be aggregated in real time and give you analysis without you needing to patch systems together. And then the final thing for companies that are more mature is that we've seen, as the tech stack has evolved over the last decade, we've seen a lot of disparate, unintegrated tools. And this is its own challenge. We've seen that companies have a tool for sanitation and a tool for CAPA and a tool for inbound inspections. And the more that you have siloed data, the more that you have challenges in pulling off a system like this. For your operators, the more that you are multi-tool, the less that your data will be reliable because they need to application hop. They have 10 different applications sending them notifications of do this, do that. It's more likely that they will miss data, and missing data is going to undermine the rest of the validity of the system. It's more likely that you'll have training gaps where when you teach people how to use, even if it's 3 different systems on the floor, they're going to run into blocks of how they use one. They can start to fudge data. So the more that we see a lack of integration, the harder it is to get a reliable data feed, and the more that blind spots occur for managers, the more that you need to have integrations that you need to maintain. So what we are seeing thematically in the food safety sector today is centralization. Companies are moving from early tools that addressed a single procedure to more modern tools that are multi-procedure. This is making it easier to roll out solutions for operators. This is making it easier to actually maintain visibility for managers. So why are companies running into these roadblocks? I think these are symptoms. I don't think this is the root cause. What is getting in the way, firstly, is usability. When we see things that are very purpose-built for a single procedure, it's often because alternative programs haven't made those procedures approachable for operators on the floor. So as you assess systems you could roll out, it is critical to think of frontline adoption first and foremost. Does it enable live translation? With a modern tool, you should have something like 100 languages in real time for record keeping, all seamlessly integrated together. This is because your staff are very multicultural in the front lines. We often see in our clients there are 15 or more languages spoken as the native tongue for the operators who need to capture the data. So how are you accommodating that group? Visual instructions. A lot of our clients have moved away from conventional text-based SOPs. We're seeing pictures, videos of facilities, and these need to be delivered in real time inside the records. We are moving kind of beyond the era where SOPs were just housed in a binder on a shelf. That needs to come in real time so that operators can reinforce the overwhelming initial training that they get when they join your operation. And then it comes down to the simplest design details. If your operators are going to be capturing data while they're wearing gloves, while they're moving on a tablet, you need larger touch targets. These are just examples of things that are going to make a system highly usable for operator adoption. What comes into play with that is how configurable is your system. We've seen a lot of tools where they can really only tackle a single program or procedure. It's like, it's a great tool for sanitation, but can it do a foreign material check? Probably not. And so you really need a system that doesn't force changes in your real life procedures. What everyone in this room has probably already built out for their procedures is probably the right way to approach it for now. And anytime you have to change those real life procedures to suit software, that's where you're gonna start seeing people getting frustrated. You're gonna start seeing paper and spreadsheets reoccur inside the operation because people are sick of dealing with clunky workarounds in the software. So configurability is one of the most important things to actually ensure that whatever platform it is that you roll out is able to effectively address all of the programs without blind spots, without application hopping. And what makes that work is having people and services embedded. What we saw originally in the tech industry is a lot of tools that are just like self-configure. It's like you buy it, there's a subscription, you deal with it yourself. And a lot of food safety teams are too overwhelmed, too busy to actually build out a tool the way that they need it to work when they're just left in a silo. And so you need expert teams that will coach, that will deploy, that will actually build the application for you. And if you're able to address these things, the value of it is so big right off the jump. I'm gonna get back to that, but I'm curious to hear from the group what kind of blocker you guys are facing in order to actually achieve risk scoring. Okay, very cool. So silos, top thing. And that's actually a promising thing in my view. If you guys are already deploying systems, if on the whole there's already a lot of structure in place and the challenge that you have is integration, this can be achieved through APIs. This can be achieved by having a more configurable tool. And thematically, we're seeing most businesses, like the ones in this room, focus on consolidating applications in the next year. So we see this quite a lot, and it's something that is achievable to overcome. It could entail new software that replaces some siloed ones. It could entail new APIs that keep those existing tools but patch them together automatically. So if you guys choose to address this, I think that there's a very promising return that you're able to bring to the leadership in your companies in order to make it work. We spend a lot of time doing case studies for our clients. When you address these blockers, what happens? What are the immediate measurable results that you can bring forward to actually get this kind of investment approved? Thematically, what we're hearing is that operators are moving something like 2 times faster in capturing data when you effectively address these things. When you have a more usable tool, a more configurable tool that's backed by the right services, when you do that to break down the silos, when you have structure, this is going to help the operators to move 2 times faster. And the labor savings that you see from that right off the jump can validate the whole investment. But what we see in complement to that is that managers are moving something like 50 to 75% faster in audit prep. And this is really powerful because instead of spending your time chasing paper, preparing for audits, you're actually able to regain the time that you would need in order to put your risk scoring to work. And when you do that, holy man, the value of risk scoring in complement to these direct results is so huge. Maple Leaf is a really good example. Maple Leaf is one of the top 10 largest meat companies in North America. They operate 20-some facilities. They deployed risk scoring in 2016. And within 3 years, they achieved an 80% reduction in complaints normalized to production volume. 80% reduction, that's crazy. The impact to the business from that is so big. And what you can see in this chart is that they didn't just reduce the number of complaints overall, they actually just reduced variability in addition to that. So whereas they used to have these huge peaks and troughs and really a lot of unpredictability in their operating outcomes, you can see over time it normalized down to this really tight period. It's something like a quarter of the variability that they used to have in their operation. So this has such a broad-reaching impact just beyond food safety. What this represents is process control. And when you achieve that, you have an operational resilience that will improve the trust that you have across the whole supply chain. Your business will grow as a result of this. So this kind of impact from risk scoring is really a testament to how Maple Leaf was able to use it to coordinate people from the floor to the board. So at a shift level, operators talk about changes in risk. At a plant leadership level, there are weekly touch bases where they review changes in the risk score, key indicators, key incidents, how to control for them. At a management level, there is a monthly executive drumbeat. At a quarterly level, there's a board meeting. And it is the same charts in all of these meetings. That's what's so cool. It coordinates everyone together. It's one drumbeat. It doesn't matter if you are doing a sanitation shift at 4 a.m. or if you're approving a $400 million investment in your plants. It's the same risk score. And so it creates a unified, intuitive language that empowers cultural buy-in. When we talk to Lineage about the results of having these kind of analytics plugged in, this will give you more of a qualitative take. Lineage was able to really dial in on recurrence in customer claims. This is one of the biggest cold chain operations in the world. And they used to have these problems where they would have recurring issues, how vehicles were loaded, how yards were checked, how trucks were inspected. And all of this led to huge claims payouts, which it didn't just have an immediate financial impact on the business, it also had a big impact in customer trust. And as they were able to dial in on recurrence as a result of having a data-driven feed from the operation, it made a huge difference for their company. So the bottom line here is that it's time to move on from a checklist-driven culture. Leaders need to really champion a change towards a data-driven drumbeat. And as managers, it's important to pivot your focus from audit prep into continuous improvement. When you pair a focus on management, data-driven insights leading to continuous improvement with cultural buy-in from the floor to the board, you have a whole army of people who will actually carry out and action these changes for you with much better adoption of procedural updates in addition to smarter procedural updates in the first place. This isn't just about passing audits. It's not even just about food safety. It's about true operational resilience and building a stronger process that can be objective, defensible, controlled, and predictive. So this is really what we believe food safety looks like beyond the audit.